The man who had come to buy Juniper Hollow and wipe it off. The map walked into the copper kettle looking like something the storm had chewed up and spit out. And the only person in that whole diner who treated him like a human being was the woman whose entire life he was about to bulldoze. It was the third week of January, and the snow had been coming down sideways since noon. Route 9 was a sheet of ice. The bell over the door jingled, and a gust of wind carried in a man in a soaked wool coat that probably cost more than the diner made in a slow week, though nobody could have told that under all the salt stains and slush. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead. There was 3 days of stubble on his jaw. He had the look of a guy whose fancy sedan had slid into a ditch a mile back and who'd walked the rest of the way, which was exactly what had happened. Every head at the counter turned. Old Gus, the cook, squinted at him through the pass-through window. A couple of regulars in Carhartt stopped chewing. In a town of 1,100 people, a stranger was an event, and a stranger this beat-up was practically a parade. "We're closing in 20. Somebody muttered, not to him exactly, just into the air, the way people do when they've decided you don't belong. The man stood there dripping on the mat. He didn't seem to know what to do with his hands, and Camille Doyle, wiping down the last of the booths in the back, looked up and saw him, and she saw all the rest of it too. The sideways looks. The way the guys at the counter had shifted their shoulders to close him out. She'd been on the wrong end of a look like that plenty of times in her 29 years. She knew the exact temperature of it, so she dropped her rag and walked over. "Hey there," she said, and she smiled, a real one, the kind that reached her eyes. "You look half frozen. Come sit by the radiator, it's the only one in the place that actually works." The man blinked at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. My car went off the road," he said. His voice was rough, low. "Back near the bridge. I don't have cell service, and I didn't. I saw your lights." "Course you did. We're the only thing open past 6. She was already steering him toward the corner booth, the good one, the warm one. "Sit." "You want coffee? You want coffee." Nobody walks in from that mess and doesn't want coffee. He sat down slowly, like a man not used to being told what to do. Water ran off his coat and pooled under the table. Behind the counter, Nell caught Camille's eye and mouthed, "Who is that?" and Camille just shrugged and grabbed the pot. She came back with a mug and filled it to the brim. "Kitchen's technically shutting down," she said. "But Gus made too much chili today, because Gus always makes too much chili, and it's just going to get thrown out otherwise. You want a bowl? On the house. You don't have to do that." "I know I don't." She set the pot down on the table. "But it's 10 degrees out, and you walked here, and I'd feel like a real jerk sending you back into that with nothing but coffee. Let me feed you. Humor me." Something moved across his face then, quick, there and gone, and Camille couldn't have named it. It looked almost like surprise, or something older and sadder than surprise, but he nodded, and she went to get the chili. What Camille Doyle did not know, what she had no way of knowing, was that the man in the corner booth was Beckett Thorne, and Beckett Thorne was the president of Thorne Development, and Thorne Development was 3 signatures away from closing on 19 parcels of downtown Juniper Hollow, including the crumbling brick building the copper kettle sat in, which the company planned to level along with the rest of Main Street to make room for a distribution warehouse the size of 40 football fields. He had come up here alone, in an unmarked car, dressed down, precisely because his father had taught him to always walk the ground before you buy it. "Look a thing in the eye before you kill it," Silas Thorne liked to say. Beckett had walked 100 main streets like this one. Dying towns were his whole business. He had learned a long time ago not to feel anything about them. And then a waitress with tired eyes and a warm laugh had crossed a room to make sure a stranger didn't get frozen out, and for reasons he could not explain, Beckett Thorne felt his chest go tight. The chili was good, better than good. He hadn't eaten anything that wasn't plated by a chef in a tasting menu in longer than he could remember, and here he was practically inhaling a $5 bowl of chili with saltines crumbled on top, and it was better than any of it. "Good, right?" Camille said, sliding into the booth across from him without asking, because her feet were killing her and it was almost closing time and nobody was going to complain. "Gus won't tell anybody his recipe. Says he's taking it to the grave. I've offered to marry him for it. He says I can't afford the alimony." Beckett almost choked on a saltine, trying not to laugh. "I'm Camille," she said. "This is my well. It was my mom's place. Now it's sort of everybody's and mostly the bank's." "Beckett," he said. And then, because he had not planned to give even that much, he added, "Just Beckett. Just Beckett." She studied him for a second, and there was something sharp under all that warmth, some intelligence that took a quick, quiet inventory of him. The ruined but expensive coat, the good boots, the hands that had never done rough work. She didn't say anything about it. She just tucked it away somewhere. "Well, just Beckett. The tow company's closed till morning, and the only motel's the Starlight out on 9, and the Starlight is a place I would not send my worst enemy." So, she tapped the table. "You got somewhere to be tonight?" He did, technically. He had a suite booked in the city, 40 minutes away, that he was never going to reach. "No," he said. "I don't." That was how Beckett Thorne, who owned a penthouse and a house in the Hamptons, and a place in Aspen he'd been to twice, ended up sleeping on the sagging pull-out couch in the back office of the Copper Kettle Diner, under a quilt that smelled like cinnamon and dish soap, while the snow buried his car and buried the whole town. And for the first time in 15 years, he slept through the night without a pill. He should have left in the morning. The tow truck pulled his car out by 10, and the roads were plowed by noon, and there was absolutely nothing keeping him in Juniper Hollow except that he called his assistant, Warren, and told him to push the closing a week. "Push it," Warren repeated, in the careful voice of a man who has learned not to question, but wants it on record that he considered it. "Sir, your father? Tell my father I'm doing due diligence. On the ground? Personally? For a week? Tell him whatever makes him stop calling." He hung up. Then he walked back into the Copper Kettle and ordered eggs, and Camille raised an eyebrow at him and said, "Thought you'd be halfway home by now," and Beckett said, "My car's making a noise," which was a lie, and she said, "Gus's brother-in-law does engines out of his garage. I'll write down the number," which meant he now had to invent a noise, which he did, badly, and she looked at him like she knew exactly what he was doing and had decided to let him do it. What followed was the strangest week of Beckett Thorne's life. Camille appointed herself, without ever quite saying so, his guide to a place he had come to erase. She didn't know that, of course. She thought he was just a guy passing through with a busted car and, she suspected, a busted life, because he had that look. And Camille Doyle had never in her life been able to walk past a busted thing without trying to fix it. She took him around. That was the thing. She took him around. Nobody had shown Beckett anything in years. People showed him spreadsheets and renderings and projections. Camille showed him the hardware store, where old Hollis had been sharpening the same set of blades since 1974 and would tell you the entire history of every screw if you let him. She showed him the little library that ran on volunteers and a bake sale. She showed him the mural on the side of the pharmacy that the high school had painted, half faded now, of the whole town holding hands around the creek. "It's corny," she said, standing in front of it in the cold, her breath fogging. "My mom always said the whole town was corny, but she loved it anyway. There's a difference between corny and fake, you know. This place is corny. It is not fake." She glanced at him. "I've been to places that are the other way around, fancy and hollow. I'll take corny." Beckett, who had spent his entire adult life in rooms that were fancy and hollow, did not say anything. She fed him, constantly. That first day he tried to leave a 50 on the table for a $9 breakfast, and she picked it up and pressed it back into his hand and said, "Absolutely not. Put that away. Are you trying to make me look bad?" And then when he protested, "You'll pay me back when you can. Wipe a table. Refill some coffee. You look like you've got 2 working arms." So Beckett Thorne, worth an amount of money that had its own zip code, spent an afternoon in a borrowed apron, refilling coffee mugs for the regulars of the Copper Kettle, and by the end of it Gus was calling him the new guy, and 2 elderly sisters at the counter had tried to set him up with their granddaughter. He was terrible at it. He spilled a whole pot. He couldn't remember who ordered what. Camille laughed at him so hard she had to hold on to the counter. "You have never worked a day of service in your life," she said, wiping her eyes. "I've worked plenty," he said, stung and trying not to show it. "Not like this." She took the pot out of his hands, gently. "It's okay. Some people are good with numbers and some people are good with people, and you, just Beckett, are very clearly a numbers guy." She had no idea how close she'd cut. The evenings were the worst and the best. When the diner closed and Gus went home and Nell went home, Camille would sit in the back with a beer and her mother's old recipe box and her laptop, and Beckett watched her fight. Because that was what it was. It was a fight, he had assumed. He'd assumed the way he always assumed about these towns, that the diner was just failing, The slow, soft dying of a place that had stopped mattering, but it wasn't slow and it wasn't soft. Camille was clawing at it with everything she had. She'd taken out a second job doing books for the feed store. She clipped coupons and drove 40 minutes to the restaurant supply place to save 11 cents a can. She'd redone the whole menu to cut waste. She was 3 months behind on the building loan, and she had a plan, an actual spreadsheet of a plan, to be caught up by spring if the winter didn't kill her. "My mom left me this place," she told him one night, not looking up from the screen. "She left me this place and $40,000 of debt and about 1,000 people who think of it as their living room. When she got sick, the whole town brought food. For her. She fed them for 30 years, and when it was time, they fed her back. She finally looked up, and her eyes were bright. I am not going to be the Doyle who let it go under. I'd rather die. I mean that in a completely healthy and normal way." Beckett laughed because she'd wanted him to, and then he stopped laughing because sitting in that back office was the specific weight of what he was, pressing down on his sternum. He had, in a folder on his phone, a rendering of what would stand where they were sitting. It was very clean. There was a lot of gray concrete and a truck bay. There was a little patch of what the landscaping firm called green amenity space near the parking lot. "Why don't you get a loan?" he heard himself say. "A real one. Restructure the debt. There are." He caught himself before he said, "There are lenders I could put you in front of by end of day. There are options." Camille laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Banks don't loan money to diners in dying towns, Beckett. You know what a loan officer sees when he looks at Juniper Hollow? He sees a place with a shelf life. He sees a place that some big, ugly company is going to come buy up and flatten for a warehouse any day now. There's a rumor going around about that. Did you hear? Some developer, Thorne something. They've been quietly buying up empty storefronts for a year." She shook her head, disgusted. "Vultures. They wait till a town's on its knees and then they come in and pick it clean and put up a box where the whole world used to be. And everybody just rolls over. 'Cause what are you going to do, right? You can't fight a billionaire." She said it so casually. "You can't fight a billionaire." She said it the way you'd say you can't fight the weather, like it was just a fact of the physical universe. And she went back to her spreadsheet, and Beckett Thorne sat in the ruins of his own certainty and felt, for the first time in his adult life, ashamed. He almost told her that night. He got as far as, "Camille, there's something I have to." And she looked up with those tired, trusting eyes, and he lost his nerve completely and asked her about the recipe box instead. And she lit up and spent an hour showing him her mother's handwriting. The little notes in the margins. "Loretta's, not for company, and do not let the pot boil. You know what you did last time." Addressed to some past version of herself. And Beckett fell the rest of the way in love and hated himself the whole time he was doing it. There was, of course, a past he didn't know she carried. Camille didn't know she carried it either, not the way it connected. She only knew that 14 years ago, when she was 15 and the diner was thriving and her mother was healthy, a boy had come through town. A runaway, they'd figured, older than her, maybe 17, thin as a rail, mean-eyed with hunger and pride. He'd shown up at the back door one night, looking to trade work for food, and Loretta Doyle had taken one look at him and sat him down and fed him for 4 days running, and never once asked him a single question he didn't want to answer. On the 4th morning he was gone, left a note that just said thank you and a name that wasn't his real name, they were pretty sure. Loretta kept that note in the recipe box for the rest of her life. "You never know," she used to say, "which kid you feed is going to grow up and remember." Camille had forgotten about it. It was a small thing, one of 1,000 small kindnesses in a life full of them. Beckett had not forgotten. Beckett had never forgotten. He had thought about that diner and that woman more times than he could count, in boardrooms and on private planes and at 3 in the morning. He had not known, when the deal crossed his desk, that Juniper Hollow was the town. Small towns blurred. He hadn't put it together until he'd walked in out of the storm and seen the tin ceiling and the recipe box on the shelf, and a woman with Loretta Doyle's exact way of crossing a room to save a stranger, and understood, with a horror that had no bottom, that he had come to demolish the one place on earth that had ever shown him unearned mercy. That was why he'd pushed the closing. That was why he couldn't leave. And that was why, on the 6th day, standing alone in the empty diner while Camille ran to the bank, he pulled out his phone and called Warren and said, "I want to know if there's any way to pull Juniper Hollow out of the assemblage." A pause. "Pull it out. Sir, that town is the linchpin. Without those 19 parcels, the whole distribution deal is. I know what it is. Your father structured this personally. I know that too. He's going to want a reason. Beckett looked around the diner, at the tin ceiling, the mismatched chairs, the mural he could see through the front window, the whole corny, unfake heart of the place. Tell him I found a better opportunity, he said. Tell him I'll explain when I get back. He hung up. He should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt like a man standing on a trapdoor, because he understood, even then, that he had just made two choices: to save the town, and to keep lying to the woman he loved, and that those two choices could not both survive contact with the truth. Her name was Sloane Whitaker, and she arrived in a black Range Rover at 2 o'clock on the 7th day, in heels entirely wrong for the ice, and she walked into the copper kettle like she was doing it a favor. Beckett went very still. There you are, Sloane said, pulling off leather gloves one finger at a time. You have any idea how many people are trying to reach you? Warren's having a nervous breakdown. Your father sent me. She looked around the diner with the frank distaste of someone appraising a demolition site, which, to be fair, was her actual job. Sloane was Thorne Development's VP of Acquisitions, and she'd been Beckett's fiancée for 8 months 2 years ago, until they'd both realized they got along much better as sharks in the same water than as anything softer. God, this place is worse than the photos. What are you even doing up here? You've been off comms for a week. Camille had come out of the kitchen with 2 plates. She stopped. Can I help you? Camille said in the pleasant, careful voice Beckett had heard her use on difficult customers. Sloane glanced at her the way you'd glance at a piece of furniture. We're fine, thanks. Beckett, we need to talk about the assemblage, because if you seriously think we can carve out... She stopped, looked between them. Something clicked behind her sharp eyes, and a slow, incredulous smile spread across her face. Oh, she said. Oh, you have got to be kidding me. Sloane, does she know? Sloane laughed, delighted, cruel. She doesn't know. Beckett, you've been up here playing house for a week in the town we're about to level, and she doesn't. She turned to Camille, and her voice went sugary. Honey, sweetheart, do you know who this is? The diner had gone dead quiet. Gus's spatula had stopped. Camille set the 2 plates down on the counter very carefully, like they might break. He said his name is Beckett, she said. His name is Beckett Thorne, Sloane said, as in Thorne Development. As in the company that owns the paper on half this street and is going to bulldoze it into a warehouse by March. That's the vulture you've been feeding on. She smiled at Beckett. I'll be in the car, don't take too long. Your father wants you home tonight. The bell jingled. She was gone. Nobody moved. Camille stood behind the counter, and Beckett watched the color leave her face, watched her go through it in real time. The confusion, then the arithmetic, then the terrible arrival at the answer. He watched her look at the recipe box on the shelf. He watched her look at the mural through the window. He watched her look at him, and he would remember the look on her face for the rest of his life, because it was not anger, not yet. It was worse than anger. It was the specific private devastation of someone realizing that the one good thing that had happened to her in a hard year had been a lie from the first minute. Camille, he said. Get out, she said, very quietly. Please, let me. Get out of my mother's diner. He went. There was nothing else to do. He walked past the counter and the frozen regulars and out into the cold, and behind him he heard the sound of a coffee pot shattering against the floor. And he did not turn around because he could not bear to. She did not cry that night. That was the thing that scared Nell, who stayed with her till midnight cleaning up the glass. Camille didn't cry and didn't yell and didn't say much of anything. She just moved around the diner, wiping things that were already clean, and finally she said, in a flat, empty voice, he sat in that booth and let me feed him and give him a bed and take him to the mural, and he was going to knock the mural down. And Nell didn't have anything to say to that, because there wasn't anything. The next morning there was a letter waiting, slid under the front door before dawn. It was on heavy paper, and it was from a law firm, and it was not from Beckett. It was a formal notice of intent to purchase and repurpose, informing the current tenant that a closing was scheduled and that the tenant would be provided relocation assistance in accordance with. She stopped reading. She sat down on the cold floor, with the letter in her lap. The town found out fast, the way towns do. By noon, everybody knew. The stranger Camille Doyle had been so kind to, the one half the town had watched her feed for free, was the man who owned their doom. Some of them were angry at Beckett. Some of them, in the ugly way of frightened people, were a little angry at her, like she'd let the wolf in, and she felt that too, and it was the worst part. She stopped answering her phone. He called. She counted, later, when she finally looked. He called 11 times, and left one message which she did not listen to for 3 days. She turned him off. She turned all of it off. On the second day she found herself walking, without deciding to, out to the old creek where the mural crowd was painted, and she sat down on the frozen bank, and she finally cried, and that was where the woman found her. "You'll catch your death sitting on ice," said a voice, and Camille looked up to see Ruthie Vance, who had lived in the yellow house past the bridge for going on 50 years, and who had buried 2 husbands and a son, and was widely considered the meanest and wisest woman in Juniper Hollow, sometimes in the same sentence. "I'm fine, Miss Ruthie. You're crying on a riverbank in January. You are the furthest thing from fine there is." Ruthie lowered herself down onto the bank with a grunt, uninvited, and pulled her coat tight. "That developer boy, that's what this is." Camille wiped her face. "You heard, child. I heard before you did, probably. I've got a police scanner and nothing to do." Ruthie looked out at the frozen creek. "So he lied to you? That what's got you out here freezing your tail off?" "He lied about everything. Who he was, why he was here, he let me." Camille's voice cracked. "I gave him my mom's quilt. I told him about the recipe box, and the whole time he was here too, he's going to knock it all down, and he just sat there and let me." Ruthie let her finish. Then she was quiet a while. "Let me ask you something, and I want you to actually think before you answer, not just say the thing that hurts least. In that whole week, when it was just the 2 of you and nobody watching and nothing to gain." She turned her head. "Did that man seem like he was faking it?" Camille opened her mouth to say yes. She thought about the way he'd laughed at Gus's joke, choking on a saltine. She thought about how bad he was at refilling coffee, and how he'd kept trying anyway, red-faced and stubborn, because she'd asked him to. She thought about the look on his face when she showed him her mother's handwriting. She thought about, "Why don't you get a loan? There are options," and the way he'd stopped himself, like there was something he wanted to give her and couldn't. "I don't know," she said, and it came out very small. "I'm not telling you to forgive him," Ruthie said. "A lie's a lie, and that's a big one, and you're allowed to be as mad as you please for as long as you please. But I'll tell you what your mama would say, because I knew Loretta 40 years. She put a cold hand on Camille's arm. "She'd say, don't let the anger do your thinking for you. Anger's honest, but it's stupid. It can't tell the difference between a man who used you and a man who got in over his head and was too much of a coward to climb out. And those are 2 very different men, Camille. You owe it to yourself to find out which one you fed." She got up, slow and creaking, and brushed off her coat. "Now come off that ice before I have to explain to your mother's ghost why I let you get pneumonia." The message she finally listened to, on the 3rd night, was 30 seconds long. His voice was wrecked. "Camille, you don't have to call back. You don't have to ever talk to me again, and I'll understand it, and I won't fight it. I need you to know one thing, because I can't stand you not knowing it. I killed the deal, not the warehouse. The whole thing, Juniper Hollow, all of it, it's dead. The letter you got is a machine that was already running, and I've stopped it. Nobody's knocking anything down. Not the diner, not the mural, not any of it. I did it before Sloan ever showed up. I did it because of," a long pause, a breath. "I did it because your mother fed a runaway kid 14 years ago and never asked his name, and that kid was me, and I have spent my whole life becoming exactly the kind of man who would flatten the one place that was ever kind to me. And I didn't figure out it was this town until I was already standing in it, loving you. I'm not asking you for anything. I just needed you to know the town is safe. It was always going to be safe. Take care of yourself, Camille." The message ended. Camille sat in the dark back office for a long time. Then she went to the shelf and took down the recipe box, and she dug through the cards and the coupons and the yellowed clippings until she found it. The small square of paper her mother had kept for 14 years, and she unfolded it and read the 2 words in a teenager's cramped hand. "Thank you," and the name signed underneath, the name they'd all assumed was fake. It said Beck. She didn't call him. She wasn't ready, and being ready couldn't be rushed, and anyway she had a diner to run, and a debt to fight, and a town that needed calming down. She sent one text, 3 words, "I got your message." And she left it there, and he didn't push, and that he didn't push, that he gave her the space he'd promised and didn't send flowers or lawyers or money, that he just went quiet and waited. Did more to reach her than anything he could have done. Weeks passed. The debt notice turned out to be, as promised, a dead machine. A second letter came, formally withdrawing the intent to purchase, and the storefronts Thorne had bought up around town were quietly transferred to a community land trust that I'll act on behalf of an anonymous donor, with a single condition attached, which was that the trust be governed by residents of Juniper Hollow. Everybody knew who the anonymous donor was. Nobody could prove it. Ruthie said it was the most Beckett Thorne thing she'd ever heard of, and she'd never met the man. He came back in March, not with a plan, not with a check. He came back on an ordinary Tuesday, in an ordinary coat, and he walked into the Copper Kettle and sat down in a booth. Not the corner one. He didn't presume, and when Camille came over with the pot he said, "I heard you have the best coffee in the county." "You heard wrong," Camille said. "It's terrible. Gus buys the cheap stuff. I'll take it anyway." She poured. Her hand was almost steady. "You didn't put your name on the land trust." "No, you could've. Big grand gesture. Thorne saves town. Get your picture in the paper." "I didn't want it to be about me," Beckett said. "I wanted it to be yours, all of you. I've spent my whole life buying things and slapping my name on them. This was the first thing I ever gave that I wanted to keep my hands off of." He looked up at her. "I'm not here to fix anything for you, Camille. I learned my lesson on that. You don't fix a thing for someone by buying their way out of it, you just steal the part where they get to be proud. I get it now. He turned the coffee mug slowly. "I'm just here for the terrible coffee, and if you'll let me, I'd like to earn back a table refill at a time." Camille looked at him for a long moment. "You're still bad at it," she said finally. "The refilling. You were always bad at it." "I've been practicing," Beckett said, with total seriousness. "I bought a coffee pot. I practice on my assistant. He's threatening to quit." And Camille Doyle laughed, surprised it out of herself. A real laugh, the first one in months, and put the pot down on the table and slid into the booth across from him, and the whole diner pretended very hard not to watch. He came every day after that. He'd order the cheapest thing on the menu and a slice of pie and sit in a booth and talk to her on her breaks. And he never pushed and he never presumed, and slowly, a table refill at a time, the wall came down. He learned to work the counter, badly. He learned everybody's order, badly. Gus started letting him crumble the saltines for the chili, which Nell said was basically a marriage proposal in Gus terms. He was there the day the Community Land Trust held its first meeting in the diner and elected Camille to the board, and he sat in the back and said nothing, and beamed like a fool. She forgave him. Not all at once, and not because he groveled, because he never did grovel. She'd have trusted him less if he had. She forgave him the way you thaw a creek, slow, from the bottom, until one warm afternoon in April, she realized it had already happened, that somewhere in all those terrible cups of coffee she'd stopped waiting for him to disappoint her and started expecting him to show up. "I have to ask you something," she said one evening, when the diner was empty and the light was going gold through the front window. "And I want the honest answer, the whole thing, no matter how it sounds. Anything. If you'd met me the normal way, you a Thorne, me a broke waitress in a town you came to buy, no storm, no lie, would you have even seen me? Or would I have just been a line in your spreadsheet? What did Sloan call it? A tenant?" Beckett was quiet a while. He'd learned from her that the honest answer was worth more than the flattering one. 2 years ago, you'd have been a line in the spreadsheet, he said. "I wouldn't have looked twice. I'm not proud of that, but you said the whole truth, so there it is." He met her eyes. "But that's the whole point, Camille. I'm not that man anymore. You didn't just show me a town. You showed me I'd become somebody I'd have been ashamed to let your mother meet. So would the old me have seen you?" He shook his head. "No, but the man sitting here would find you in any crowd on earth. Because you're the one who taught me how to see." Camille reached across the table and took his hand. "For the record," she said, "my mom would have liked you." Once she got done being furious. She held a grudge like nobody I ever met, and she forgave like nobody I ever met. And she'd have made you crumble saltines for about a year before she let you off the hook. You've got about 10 months left. Just so you know what you're in for." Beckett Thorne, who had everything and had learned it was nothing, looked at the woman across the table and understood he'd finally found the only thing worth keeping. 10 months, he said. "I can work with 10 months. They were married the next spring, in the diner. because there was nowhere else it could have happened. Gus catered. Ruthie gave a toast that made everyone cry and then laugh and then cry again, and threatened Beckett with bodily harm if he ever hurt her girl. And Beckett said, "Yes, ma'am," with total sincerity, and Ruthie said, "Good boy," and sat down. The copper kettle never closed, and it never became anything other than what it was. A diner with a tin ceiling and mismatched chairs and the best chili in 3 counties, its debt long since caught up, its recipe box on the shelf where it had always been. Camille ran it. She ran the land trust too, and Main Street filled back up, storefront by storefront, on the town's own terms and at the town's own pace. Beckett kept his name off all of it. He'd bought half of America in his life, and the only thing he was ever prouder of than that was the coffee he learned, eventually, to pour without spilling. On the wall by the register, next to the recipe box, Camille framed a small square of yellowed paper with 2 words on it in a runaway teenager's hand, and underneath it, a note in her mother's. "You never know which kid you feed is going to grow up and remember." And under the 2 of them, in Camille's own writing, one more line, added the day they hung it. Turns out she was right.